advice on air. However, they do not have your full medical history and they have not seen you. Please verify the advice given to you on air with your doctor who knows you better. Neither the doctors nor Radio Ansaar will be held responsible for any ill health caused by the advice given on Radio Ansaar.
أحب الوفاء بشتى الصور أحب الوفي الأمين الأغر فأهل الوفاء كلون السحاب وحسن الربيع وماء المطر أحب الوفاء بشتى الصور أحب الوفي الأمين الأغر.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the Medical Files brought to you by the Islamic Medical Association. A very warm welcome to all our listeners. Tonight's show is broadcast live on 7 different radio stations as part of our special simulcast. But we're broadcasting live from our Durban studios tonight. So whether you're tuning in from Durban or anywhere across South Africa, thank you for joining us. I am your host for tonight's topic of discussion. My name is Dr. Zakaria Ahmed Ismail, and I'm a medical officer based in Durban. Tonight, our topic of discussion is all about a skin condition called vitiligo. So have you ever noticed someone with white patches on their skin and always wondered what causes it? Well, we are here tonight to tell you that behind every patch lies a story of courage, a story of confusion, and often silence. But tonight we break that silence. With World Vitiligo Day coming up on the 25th of June, we are putting the spotlight on a condition that affects millions across the globe, yet is still surrounded by stigma and misunderstanding. Vitiligo doesn't hurt, but the stigma often does. It's more than just skin deep. So in this program, we're going to be learning about the facts, we'll be tackling the fiction, and opening up an honest conversation about skin, identity, and acceptance. And joining us for our discussion is our esteemed guest, Dr. NAUFAL RABOOBEE, who is a specialist dermatologist based in Durban with a special interest in vitiligo. Dr. RABOOBEE is the president of the National Vitiligo Society of South Africa, the Dermatology Society of South Africa, and is also a medical advisory board member of the Global Vitiligo Foundation. So, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Medical Files, Dr. RABOOBEE.
Wa alaikum assalam, Zakaria, and to our listeners, and a very good evening to all our listeners and patients who are joining us today.
We appreciate you joining us for this important discussion tonight. So,
thank you very much.
Stay tuned as we explore what vitiligo really is, what causes it, what treatments exist, and most importantly, how we can create a more inclusive, compassionate world. This is Medical Files. Tonight we're choosing empathy over assumption, and we're choosing truth over taboo. I'd also like to highlight that this is a live show and an interactive discussion, so we will welcome your input and your questions. You can send it via WhatsApp on 060-904-1056. That's 060-904-1056. I would also like to remind the medical professionals in the audience today that the IMA South Africa is having its 43rd annual convention on the 11th of July till the 13th of July at Southern Sun Elangeni in Durban. And you can register today at www.imasa.org.za. So, Dr. RABOOBEE, let's start with the basics. What exactly is vitiligo?
So I think in its simplest terms, we can say it's a skin disease where the skin becomes white in patches. And this can occur, of course, on any part of the body. And the question that often arises is why it occurs. So vitiligo currently is regarded as an autoimmune disease. And that means the body attacks its own pigment cells. You know, we are the color we are because of pigment cells, and those cells are called melanocytes. And if those melanocytes are attacked, and they are usually attacked by our own immune systems, those cells get damaged and they are not there anymore. So you see right through the surface layer of the skin into the deeper layers of the skin, and that's white in color. And this is why the skin appears white. Bear in mind that sometimes vitiligo affects places in the body that are not visible. There are 3 other sites in the body that contain pigment cells. One of them would be the eyes, The second would be the ear.
Mm.
The organs of balance inside the ear are made up of modified pigment cells.
Mm.
And you get it on the meningeal covering of the brain.
Okay.
And very rarely you can get an attack on the pigment cells in those areas. But generally, in the majority of people who have vitiligo, it affects the visible parts of the skin and sometimes the mucous membranes. In other words, it can affect the inside of the mouth and the palms and soles and so on.
Mm.
So that, in brief, would be vitiligo, a skin disease where the skin turns white in patches because the body attacks the melanocytes.
So you mentioned melanocytes. That's the cells that produce melanin. So
Yeah.
what role does melanin play in our skin, and what happens to it now in vitiligo?
Melanin is a very important pigment that protects us from sun damage. And you find that those who have pigmented skins get very little skin cancer and even wrinkles. And where the pigment cells are missing, you get wrinkles and skin cancers very much more easily. And for example, in some individuals, there are no pigment cells at all, and those kids are called albinos. And they are at huge risk for skin cancer. So the melanocytes in the body play a huge role in protection from skin cancer. But of course, it also gives us a sense of identity, a sense of belonging.
That's right.
It tells us which part of the planet we come from. It's a way we can relate to each other. It's a way we can give each other respect. It adds some variety. I mean, you can imagine a landscape without any trees or without any rivers or without any stones and so on. It's boring.
It's boring.
And this gives us a lot of vibrancy in life. It gives us a lot to look forward to, in that we can see the complexity of life and the complexity of people, and we can learn to recognize each other and live in harmony together.
No, that's very true. So what would be then some of the most common signs that someone with vitiligo might notice? Now, you mentioned the patches around the eyes. Are there any other common signs that someone might notice?
Sometimes they notice lack of pigment in the hair. So you can see loss of pigment in the skin. You may notice loss of pigment in the hair. And not always will it be accompanied by a white patch. Sometimes you see a white patch, and within the white patch you see white hairs. But sometimes you see only white hairs. And that is called follicular vitiligo, which affects only the hairs and not the skin. But in general, it would affect the skin. So white patches can occur on any part of the body. It can occur on the face. It may occur on the arms and legs. It may occur in any area of the body where pigment is present. Now, there are different kinds of vitiligo, by the way.
Right.
If you have a single patch, we call it focal vitiligo. One patch only, two patches only. It's localized. Very small area, easy to treat. Call for attention early, because if you treat within 2 years, it's better.
Okay.
It gets better more quickly. So focal vitiligo. Then we have a kind of vitiligo that is on both sides of the body. We call that symmetrical vitiligo, vitiligo vulgaris. The term vulgaris comes from the word vulgar, which means common. Like vulgar language is common language, street language. So when you see the word vulgaris in Latin, for any disease, it means the common form of that disease. So vitiligo vulgaris is generally regarded as vitiligo that occurs on two sides of the body. It's usually symmetrical. You have a type of vitiligo that is called segmental vitiligo, and that occurs only on one side of the body. And it's amazing to see it stops dead right in the middle of the body. It doesn't cross. So that is called segmental vitiligo. It carries a favorable outlook in that it grows up to a certain extent and then it stops growing. And those types of vitiligo are quite amenable to surgical treatments.
So
Then you have a type called mucosal vitiligo that may occur on the lips. So the question was, how does one recognize vitiligo? We need to look in those areas. So we look on the lips. We look on the genitalia, for example, where there's mucous membranes. So these are basically the common types of vitiligo. You get one that's called lip tip vitiligo that occurs on the lips and the tips of the fingers.
Okay.
So these are the different types, and these are the places where one looks. Also, sometimes it's not even visible if the skin is very light. We use ultraviolet light to see them. So we have what we call a Woods light. We hold it on the skin and it fluoresces. The skin fluoresces. In other words, you see this bright light being reflected and you can recognize where the vitiligo is present. And then we also look, when we are evaluating kids or adults with vitiligo, with dermatoscopes, because there are certain very typical features that one sees with a dermatoscope that one does not see with the naked eye.
So that's some of the common presentations and subtypes that you see. And we're going to explore some of the treatment options as well for these later. But I want to just allude to something now. So vitiligo, is this something that's dangerous to a person's physical health, or is it now mostly a cosmetic issue?
Well, look, it's a bit of both, because vitiligo is in fact a disorder of the immune system. The immune system is attacking, so in fact there is some physical basis for it. It is regarded as an immunological disease. So it's not just a cosmetic issue, and we would like medical aids to regard this as a disease, not as a cosmetic issue, because they would hide behind the fact that it's a cosmetic problem, that people can see it, and that's where it ends. But as I mentioned to you, vitiligo can affect other organs.
Right.
It can be associated with other autoimmune diseases. It can be associated with thyroid disease, with diabetes, with lupus, and so on. So there are other conditions. Because it's an autoimmune disease, there's an association with other autoimmune diseases.
Right.
And sometimes the vitiligo helps us to detect other autoimmune diseases, because we screen for some of them, like thyroid disease. So we would like to think of it as more than just a cosmetic condition, and that helps for reimbursement for patients who are on medical aid and that expect reimbursement, and the medical aids hide behind the fact that it is cosmetic and they don't want to reimburse. And we'd like to form a strong organization with a lot of advocacy groups that will march up to Parliament and demand the right to have it covered by medical aid. So for that reason, I mean, I mentioned to you that it can affect the ear, the eye, and the brain. It's not going to be regarded as a cosmetic problem when that happens.
That's true. So there is
Right.
definitely that physical
There's
health
definitely a physical
to
component.
it.
But I also agree with you that in the majority of people, it's a visual thing, and people whisper and they make snide remarks and they, talk to each other and make people feel uncomfortable with it. And I suppose if a person was living alone in an island and had vitiligo, he'd have nothing to worry about. But when one lives in a community, then sometimes the people closest to you are the ones that will make you most uncomfortable. And, people who have vitiligo suffer from low self-esteem, for example. They find it difficult to get jobs. They suffer from anxiety. They get depressed. All these things happen to them. Also, sometimes there's tremendous amount of difficulty forming relationships. In India, for example, vitiligo, as you mentioned, is a stigmatized disease. That people find it difficult to get marriage partners if they have vitiligo. I did a clinic there, and we found that a number of patients with vitiligo are girls of marriageable age, but also their fathers, because the word goes around that if the father has vitiligo, then the kids will get vitiligo, and for that reason they don't bring in any marriage proposals. As you know, in communities where there's arranged marriages. And in some situations it's so bad that people won't take cash in a supermarket from people with vitiligo. This is what they come and tell us. So there's a lot of psychological and emotional problems associated with vitiligo. And for that reason, people come and request treatment. And I'm happy to say that many treatments are now available that we didn't have 40 years ago.
So there's a lot of stigma that definitely surrounds this condition.
Yeah.
I want to bring it back a little bit. So can this condition, vitiligo, does it affect rather certain groups more than others? Is there certain age groups, certain demographics that are more susceptible to this disease? What's your opinion on that?
Strangely enough, vitiligo occurs across the world in every population group, and it has roughly the same incidence. The only place where it's found to have an increased incidence is in Gujarat in India. There it's been found that the incidence is a little higher than other parts of the world. There are various reasons for that, but it's not completely well explained. But generally speaking, vitiligo occurs on dark skin, it occurs on light skin. The only difference is it is highly visible when the background complexion is dark. For example, in Scandinavia, the first line treatment there is to do nothing. I mean, try doing that in South Africa or Nigeria or somewhere, where the contrast is very great between vitiligo and the normal skin. It's not possible to leave it alone. But of course, I must mention and emphasize that leaving it alone is an option. If one is comfortable with one's body and one accepts that the vitiligo is there and decides that one does not want to treat it, we respect that, and that is a treatment as well, to leave it alone. That can also be done. But generally, those who have pigmented skins would request treatment more than those who have light-colored skin.
So can this condition, can it ever be confused with any other skin conditions like fungal infections or eczema?
Yes, in fact, some of the most common conditions that end up looking like this is a fungal infection called pityriasis versicolor. And that occurs on the chest, it occurs on the back. Now, dermatologists find it easy to distinguish between the two. First of all, we take a wood's light and shine it and it fluoresces. Right? So that's an easy screening test. The definitive test is to scrape the skin and look under the microscope. And there you see fungus. And it's very clearly demonstrated. We put a drop of Parker Quink ink on it, and it's beautiful to see under the microscope. It has a certain blue color and very easily recognizable. The other condition that it often gets confused with is a condition called pityriasis alba, which is in fact a form of eczema. Pityriasis in Latin means scaling, and alba means white. So you see white patches on the faces of kids. They're present mainly on the prominences of the cheeks, and that happens because of sun exposure.
Okay.
Then you have birthmarks that could be white in color. And the difference between vitiligo and a birthmark is a birthmark one will be born with.
Right.
You see it at the time the child emerges onto the planet, that you see a white patch on the skin. So these are called achromic nevus or hypochromic nevus, and these are birthmarks. Then there's a condition that's called guttate hypomelanosis. Now, guttate means raindrops or dewdrops. It means it's small in size. Hypo means less, and melanosis means color. So there are small white patches that occur on the legs and on the arms, very common. And people come running to us to ask whether they are developing vitiligo.
Thinking it's vitiligo.
And that's a very different condition. It causes no grief apart from the fact that it's slightly visible. One doesn't need to do anything with it. So that's the point, is that there are many conditions that can resemble vitiligo. This is not even half of them that I've mentioned, but I've mentioned the most common ones. And there are other conditions like scleroderma and morphea and lichen sclerosis and lichen planus that can be confused with vitiligo sometimes. But these are the main ones that I've mentioned. And the important lesson to learn is, if you have vitiligo, go and get it. Or if you think you have vitiligo, go and see your dermatologist or your GP and get properly diagnosed.
Get it checked.
Get it checked.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Dr. RABOOBEE. There's definitely more to vitiligo than meets the eye.
Certainly.
And we're just getting started. Now we have a clear picture of what vitiligo
Great.
is, how it presents. You're listening to IMA Medical Files. We're talking all about vitiligo. If you've just joined us, we're talking about vitiligo in terms of what it is, who it affects, why awareness matters. We've just covered the basics. We're now digging deeper into what causes this condition, what can trigger it, and the many myths that surround it. So we are joined by Dr. NAUFAL RABOOBEE, who's a specialist dermatologist with a keen interest in vitiligo. So, Dr. RABOOBEE, let's continue with this. Let's talk about what causes vitiligo. So you mentioned autoimmune earlier. Are there any genetic components, any other components?
Certainly, about 20% of people who have vitiligo have a family history. But there's also a theory that it may be oxidative stress. In other words, free radicals develop inside. I mean, these are all technical terms, but they're substances that accumulate inside a cell that can cause damage to the cell. There's also a neural theory. In other words, it is believed that there are certain substances at the end of nerve endings which may secrete substances that are toxic to the pigment cells. And this explains why sometimes you get vitiligo in one side of the body, or on one side of the body only. So that's like the equivalent of a nerve supply of the body, similar to herpes zoster. And so it's zosteriform in its distribution. So it led to the theory that it may be related to nerve endings and what they secrete. And there's a concept called melanoragy, which means that the melanocytes become so weak that even a slight touch ends up damaging them. And this is what explains the Kobna phenomenon. Kobna phenomenon means that vitiligo develops at sites of pressure. So in other words, people who are wearing collars get vitiligo around the neck. Those that wear underwear will get it where the elastic touches the skin. Those who are wearing a bra, for example, will get it along the bra straps. So this is called Kobna phenomenon, where it occurs at sites of pressure on the skin. And this is another feature of vitiligo.
Okay. So are there any other triggers that can trigger this condition, make it worse? Anything about hormonal changes that you may know about?
They can. So, it's not common for it to be affected by hormonal changes. But theoretically, it is possible. It is possible to get this from certain chemicals as well, particularly chemicals that are used to process rubber. And we believe that in India, a lot of the increased incidence is because of the proximity to rubber factories. And there was an article published in one of the journals where a group in Uganda was wearing shoes to protect themselves from a certain fungal infection in the area where they were clearing the bush and trees and so on. And they all developed vitiligo of the feet from the plastic of the shoes that they were wearing.
The lining of the shoes.
The lining of the shoes. So this happens as well. So it can be chemically induced. But we make a distinction, and when it is chemically induced, we call it leukoderma. And when it is of unknown origin, we refer to it as vitiligo. But clinically, you can't tell them apart. They look the same. So there are other triggers. Some will complain about stress in their lives that trigger this off. A death in the family, a birth in the family, an overseas trip, migration, and those kind of things that trigger it off. So we always ask about stress and whether there was anything major that happened. They're changing schools, changing areas, moving from one country to another. There are many reasons for that. So there can be many, many triggers, and we always ask about triggers. Do you believe that something set the vitiligo off or made it worse? And you'll be surprised how many come back and tell us that they think it happened after some stressful event in their lives.
So emotional stress can
very definitely can aggravate it, yes.
Some people believe that eating certain foods like fish and milk together can cause vitiligo. Is there any truth to that?
Well, there's no scientific evidence for that. It's a very popular concept in the subcontinent, as you know. It came from there. And over there's a widespread belief that if you have fish and milk together, you could end up with vitiligo. I mean, this is common to many countries in the subcontinent and in the Middle East. For example, when I went to Iran, I ordered some fish. And then I said, well, I'll have a milkshake with it. He said, no, you can't mix the two together. You'll get this white disease. I said, okay, let's leave that out and carry on. But so in India as well, this is very common, that you're advised not to have fish and milk together. It's the same in Pakistan, and it's the same in some Middle Eastern countries. So this is a widespread belief, but there's no scientific evidence to support it.
To back that up. So there's a lot of misconceptions.
There are a lot of myths that go around, where people believe that it's an ancestral problem and that kind of thing.
So what are some of the other myths that you often hear?
They believe that they did something bad and they're being punished for it. And this is a form of punishment. And in local cultures, it's often said that the ancestors are angry. And this is a way of punishing the individual who has it. In fact, a lot of the concepts about vitiligo stem from punishment. That you did something wrong, so you're being punished for it. And we'd like those who have vitiligo to understand that they've done nothing wrong. It's nothing that they could control themselves. It's not a punishment from the ancestors. It's not punishment from the divine. It's not, anything that they've done incorrectly. So there are a lot of myths that go around, and we need to be aware that vitiligo is a condition that happens because of an aberrant immunological issue and not because they've done something wrong.
So these cultural or traditional
there are a lot of cultural and traditional beliefs about it, yes.
These contribute to the stigma of the
condition. They contribute to the stigma, yes.
What would you say is one thing you wish that everyone knew about this condition, facing these stigmas?
That vitiligo is not contagious, first of all. That vitiligo can be treated if a person desires to have it treated. And that we need to create awareness amongst people who have it, people around them, their parents, their caregivers, their doctors, their whoever comes into contact with them. That we need to spread widespread information about this condition, that you can touch a person with vitiligo, you can shake hands with a person with vitiligo, you can embrace a person with vitiligo, you can marry somebody with vitiligo. It's not going to cause any injury in your life, right? One needs to understand and just regard it as any other patient and get on with life.
That's very true. So vitiligo is definitely not contagious.
Not contagious.
It cannot be spread by touch.
Yeah.
It's definitely some really eye-opening facts there,
Yeah.
Dr. RABOOBEE. So vitiligo, again, not contagious, not caused by food. And this condition absolutely deserves more understanding, more support. We're going to take a short ad break now. After the break, we'll be talking about what treatments are available, how patients can get the help, how they can get the support that they need to manage their condition, to manage their confidence. You are listening to Medical Files, and we will be right back.
We'd love to meet you. Pay us a visit. Radio Al-Ansar.
This hadith is sponsored by Ashraful Aid, International Humanitarian Organization.
حديث أدي قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن لكل أمة فتنة وفتنة أمتي المال. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, every ummah had a test, and the test of my ummah is wealth. The test of wealth means that neither should we be greedy for wealth, nor should we misuse the wealth Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided us with. We should not wish for more than Allah has fixed for us. We should always thank Allah for what He has provided us, and trust in Him alone to help us. And we should always spend in the path of Allah by helping the poor and needy.
This hadith is sponsored by Ashraful Aid, International Humanitarian Organization.
Are you looking for a meaningful way to fulfill your zakat obligation? Look no further than Ashraful Aid. With our trusted track record, your zakat reaches those who need it the most in the most honorable and dignified manner. Visit our website at www.ashrafulaid.org.
Sunnah a Day, proudly brought to you by Sunpick, 100% pure sunflower cooking oil. Sunpick, cook more with less.
मेरे नबी प्यारे नबी सुन्नत तेरी दुनिया दी.
Sunnah a day. Do not eat food while it is very hot. Wait until it becomes warm before consuming.
Sunnah a Day, proudly brought to you by Sunpick, 100% pure sunflower cooking oil. Sunpick, cook more with less.
Imagine this. You're putting together a 7-color meal, from the creamy pasta to the glazed carrots and flavorful onion gravy. This entire meal is made with our 100% pure extra virgin olive oil from our La Familia range, bringing outstanding quality and taste to your kitchen. Shop La Familia 100% pure extra virgin olive oil at any leading supermarkets near you. La Familia, heart of the home.
Audio stream across the world on radioalansar.co.za.
Doctors and guests on the Medical Files program will help you with any medical problems you have by giving you advice on air. However, they do not have your full medical history and they have not seen you. Please verify the advice given to you on air with your doctor who knows you better. Neither the doctors nor Radio Al Ansar will be held responsible for any ill health caused by the advice given on Radio Al Ansar.
أحب الوفاء بشتى الصور أحب الوفي الأمين الأمين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the Medical Files, your trusted guide to medical awareness and empowerment. I'm your host, Dr. Zakaria Ahmed Ismail, and today we're talking about a skin condition that affects millions around the world but is still widely misunderstood, and that is vitiligo. The reason we have this topic is to mark World Vitiligo Day, which is on June 25th, and we're going to be using this session to educate, to create awareness, and to contest the stigma that often surrounds this condition. And joining us today is Dr. NAUFAL RABOOBEE, who's a specialist dermatologist with a keen interest in vitiligo. Dr. RABOOBEE, to continue our conversation, so far we've covered what vitiligo is, we've covered what causes it. Now we're going to focus on how it's managed, what treatment options are available, how people living with it can be supported both medically, both emotionally. So let's talk treatment. Is there a cure? And if so, what options exist today?
All right. Currently, there is no known cure for vitiligo, but we have many excellent treatments. And just to orientate our listeners, you know that the pigment is missing from the upper layer of the skin, that layer is the epidermis. Now, it's important to understand that there is pigment in the bases of hairs. So there's another area in the skin which still contains pigment. So our whole idea is to move that pigment into the area where it's missing higher up in the skin. And that's in fact the purpose of treatment. Now also there's a concept called stability. We need to stabilize the vitiligo. Otherwise the newly arriving pigment cells will all be gobbled up by the immune cells as they arrive on the scene. So that we need to stabilize the vitiligo on the one hand, and on the other hand we need to repigment the parts of the skin where the pigment is missing. So I mentioned to you earlier that when I was in medical school we had only the topical steroids, but now there's a host of other medicines that can be applied on the skin, and these include what we call the calcineurin inhibitors. The name is long, but there are two members of that group, and not to mention trade names. One is called tacrolimus and the other is called pimecrolimus, and they have common trade names. And these are applied on the skin. They work well. We use it extensively. And the newest medicines that are available now to apply are called the JAK inhibitors. Nothing to do with Jack and Jill. It stands for Janus kinase. In other words, it blocks the pathway of how vitiligo is formed, right? So it blocks the substances that are required to create vitiligo. And so it allows the vitiligo to improve. But you've got to often combine JAK inhibitors with ultraviolet light. So we use ultraviolet light to maintain the skin and to repopulate the skin with pigment cells. Now that brings us to phototherapy. Photo means light and therapy means treatment. So phototherapy essentially means treating with light. And now there are several devices that we use to treat vitiligo. One of them is narrowband UVB. It looks like a big cabinet. You open the doors, the patient walks inside, the lights shine right around the skin, and we use that for extensive vitiligo. It's still regarded as one of the mainstay treatments for vitiligo, particularly extensive vitiligo. Now, for small areas, we use the excimer laser or the excimer light, and that really has made a very, very significant advance in what is available for vitiligo, because it speeds up the process of repigmentation of the skin like 5 times. Right? What used to take us 1 year, we now do it in about a month or 2.
That's short.
Right? Very short. Even more than 5 times. In any case, the excimer laser is applied directly on the skin, the trigger is pulled, and the light shines directly on the skin, and it stimulates movement of pigment cells from the hairs into the upper layers of the skin. Or if there are no hairs in the area, like if you do the lips, for example, then the pigment cells have to migrate from the edges of the vitiligo towards the center. Now, we often supplement this with needling, for example, where we take a needle and prick the skin from the normal pigmented side in towards the vitiligo. And we create little channels through which the pigment cells walk through and move to the other side. And it's beautiful to see it happening, because within a month, when the patient comes back, you see lines of pigment forming wherever we did the needling. And so that's a fantastic treatment to do, coupled with excimer laser and excimer light. And we get rapid repigmentation with needling. So these days, we are also adding another medicine that is called 5-fluorouracil. So in other words, after we do the needling, we paint some 5-fluorouracil on the skin, and that 5-fluorouracil gets into those little channels that we've created in the skin. It suppresses the immune system in that area to prevent damage to the newly migrating pigment cells, and it allows repigmentation of the skin. Right? So repigmentation means pigment coming back, depigmentation means no pigment, and hypopigmentation means less pigment. That's for our listeners who are not familiar with those terms. Now, what about systemic treatments? Now, systemic treatments are those treatments that are given by mouth or by injection. So we sometimes use oral corticosteroids. Right? People are familiar with oral corticosteroids because it's used in arthritis and it's used in various conditions for inflammation. So that is given to stabilize the condition. In other words, if we see new patches coming up, we want to aggressively stop those new patches from coming up. And for that, we use corticosteroids. Right? Without mentioning the trade name, which I was just about to mention. And I think they caught the first alphabet of it. So in any case, we also use minocycline, and we are now using JAK inhibitors orally for this, and they are being experimented on. Would you like me to mention something about the surgical treatments, or you want to ask a few more questions before we go on with that?
I actually wanted to touch on skin grafts.
Yes, okay, let's chat about that.
Skin grafts.
Yes, we do several skin grafting procedures. One of them is called a suction blister graft. So there we make a blister, for example, on the thigh, and we take the roof of that blister and transplant it onto a vitiligo area. Now, this used to be one of the very early type of grafting for vitiligo, and currently is being superseded by many other grafting procedures. But this technique of suction blister grafting is particularly useful for the lips and mucosal membranes, mucous membranes.
More
right?
difficult to reach
areas. So those areas, we peel off the skin on the lip, we then take the blister roof and place it there, and stitch it in position until it gels and knots, and it'll transfer its pigment. It then dries off and falls off, but the skin repigments in that area. So we can do that on any area, in fact, using suction blisters. Now, the other technique that has become popular is punch grafting, and these days we use micro punch grafting. So punch grafting means we take tiny little pieces of skin from an area that's not cosmetically important. For example, we take it from the buttocks or from the thighs or from behind the ear, and then these are transplanted onto the vitiligo area at wider distances. So we take them from a close distance behind the ear, but we place it on a wider distance on the vitiligo area. So a small area can then translate to a large area of vitiligo. So then the pigment begins growing in that area, and eventually it covers the area up. So that is called punch grafting. We take tiny pieces of skin and plant them into the vitiligo area and allow the pigment to spread there. And this is a procedure that we do quite routinely for vitiligo. And then the third technique that we use for grafting is where we would take a graft, again from the thigh usually, because it's nice and broad and we can get a piece of skin there to graft. We then place it in a dish and place trypsin on it, which would separate the cells out. It separates the melanocytes from the other cells in the epidermis, from the upper layer of the skin. We then would take the vitiligo area and abrade it and remove the skin from there. We remove the epidermis. Then we take the newly prepared cells and we transplant them onto the denuded area where we've taken the skin out. And in this way, we transplant skin cells. After taking a graft and separating the cells out, we take those cells and plant them onto the area which has been freshly denuded. So that is called non-cultured melanocyte grafting. Now we call it non-cultured because you can also culture melanocytes. You can take pigment cells, send it to the laboratory and grow the melanocytes, then bring it back and plant it. Now if you do that, it's very costly. For example, the procedure would cost a minimum of 50,000 Rand or so. Whereas you can do it for 1/10 of the price if you do it with the other technique I described, where it doesn't go to the laboratory. So those are the surgical treatments. Now remember, if the vitiligo is very extensive, then it's not worth trying to put color back in every part of the skin. Let's say 90% of the skin is white. We would then use medicines to take the remaining color out and make the entire skin white.
So
and that is also a treatment.
The opposite of it.
The opposite of it. It's easier to depigment the remaining skin than to try to repigment such a large area of skin. Remember also, we use cosmetic camouflage to support the patients, and by all means they can use stains and dyes. We have some products available which stain the skin. So if you wash the skin, the stain doesn't come off so easily. Right? It gives it a color so that it matches the surrounding skin. And also patients need psychological support, they need emotional support. So those who need it, they have access to it. Right? So I think this basically summarizes the treatment. And the exciting new developments for vitiligo treatment would be the JAK inhibitors, both in the applied form and in the oral form, which are being experimented on. And I would say the excimer laser and the narrowband ultraviolet B light. And then the surgical treatments for where it is indicated. In other words, we'd evaluate the patient, make sure that they've used everything else, that nothing else is working, then we would evaluate them and consider surgical treatments.
So if I can summarize it, the mainstay of the treatment here is to basically stabilize, to stop the immune system from attacking further, worsening the vitiligo, and then trying to repigment, reintroduce that pigment back into the cells. What I wanted to ask is, are these results permanent, or does it now depend on the individual, the type?
So this is where stability comes in. If you don't stabilize the condition, then of course those pigment cells can get gobbled up. And this is why it's vital. So we use a cutoff point of 1 year. In other words, if we do any surgical treatment, there's got to be no new vitiligo area for 1 year before we would do any surgical treatment. Because if it's unstable, it will get eaten up. So if you choose the patients carefully, then the results are really long lasting. Because it means that the vitiligo is now over. It's just a white patch. In other words, the body is not actively attacking those cells. That's when we do the surgical treatment. If it's actively attacking, there's no point doing it.
And how long do we keep this stability medication for? Usually?
No, we'd stabilize the condition. It needs to remain stable for 1 year before we do any surgical treatment. We don't necessarily give the medication for 1 year. We give it until the vitiligo stops spreading, basically. And it will stop spreading. Typically, if we use a systemic steroid, it would be for 3 months.
And do patients often relapse? Can it happen?
It can happen, yes. Relapse can happen. The patient can get vitiligo again in that area. The patient can get new vitiligo area. There's a concept that we need to understand called memory T cells. That where you get rid of the T cells, the immune cells from that vicinity, there are some cells that remain there that are called memory cells. And they need little excuse to wake up again. Right? The sun might shine too brightly on them, they get vitiligo.
And they're activated.
Yeah, so they go and have... I can't say if they have fish and milk, it comes alive, because we don't know the association. But whatever is associated with it, whether it's hormonal or drugs or chemicals or stress or some trigger factor, it can make it appear.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I wanted to ask that, do things like diet, supplementations, any alternative therapies, do they play a role in treating?
We don't know of any diet that is designed for vitiligo. So we don't recommend any special diet. They don't have to stop anything. They don't have to add anything. Vitiligo is not a vitamin deficiency. So taking vitamins doesn't do anything to it. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it worse. If you're taking the vitamin for some other issue, that's fine. But it's not necessary to take a vitamin for vitiligo. There are certain alternative therapies like leucotomus, polypodium leucotomus that's applied onto the skin, and that has been shown to have some effect on vitiligo. But there isn't any special diet for vitiligo. That I must emphasize.
What about sunblock? How important is sunblock for?
Sunblock is used because the skin is white in those areas.
Mm.
And when the skin is white, those skin areas can burn very easily. And for that reason, we want to protect sunburn in those areas. And this is why we would recommend sunblock in the areas after the treatments are applied.
Okay, let's move on then to some of the more mental health issues, the stigma that surrounds this disease. What role do you think the support plays for the patient? How can a family and a friend help someone that they know with vitiligo?
Well, first of all is understanding of the vitiligo, and secondly, to get the patient to be able to talk about it. Then there's no point suppressing it or hiding it or saying, no, don't talk about it. Everyone around the individual needs to be comfortable with the condition. They need to know the condition. They need to be able to talk about it and to openly say, yeah, this is just vitiligo, right? Apart from that, I'm just like everyone else. It's just it's just an interesting shape and color. It adds some glory to the landscape, right? But the other point is how we are going to inform our communities about what this condition is. And we have a vitiligo website. It's called Vitiligo Society SA. VitiligosSociety.co.za. VitiligosSociety.co.za. It used to be VitiligosSocietySA.com. So this is South African Vitiligo Society's website. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. And we would encourage our patients to go and get some support from the website because the information you need is in there.
These are the support
and
groups.
Right, these are support. Now we've just appointed an additional member to run support groups for the whole country. And what I would encourage patients to do is those who wish to join a support group, send your name to the Vitiligo Society and we'll separate it out according to areas like KZN and Pretoria and Cape Town and so on. And we'll establish these cells and then have live meetings for them every now and then. So this offers support that people can talk to other people with the condition and they support each other as well. We've been having many support groups like this. Now, one such support group is occurring on the 21st, this Saturday, between 2 and 4. So from 2 to 4, we've got 6 speakers. 4 of them are international speakers. One is from Korea, one is from Egypt, one is from Turkey, and one is from the United States. And all of them are very senior individuals who deal with vitiligo. And here's your opportunity to come and listen to them and ask them questions and extract some information out of them and some support out of them. And 2 of them are local speakers from South Africa. And I'll be hosting it, inshallah. But there'll be 6 speakers that will be talking about vitiligo, and it will bring you absolutely up to date about what you need to know about vitiligo. The myths, the stories about it, how it affects an individual, the emotional impact that it has on people, the psychological impact it has, what treatments are available, what those treatments do, and why it's important to consider them, why it's important to go and see a dermatologist if you have it, go and find out what is available, see if it works for you. Not everything will work for everybody. There are some patients that won't do well on it. That's going to happen. But I mean, in 70-80%, we see a very good response in vitiligo.
And we try and individualize the treatment.
We can individualize the treatment. Some may need topical treatment, some may need oral, some may need ultraviolet light, some may need laser, some may need reassurance, and some may need to be told, leave it alone. You're doing well the way you are. Right?
So you said 21st of June. That's
21st of June
2 p.m. to 4 p.m.
21st of June is online. So what I would suggest is that patients go into the Vitiligo Society website, which is vitiligosociety.co.za, and go in. Then right on the top, the first line on the home page will take you to a link to register for the meeting. So please register for the meeting and come and listen from 2 to 4. It's on Teams, not on Zoom. So you might do well to download Teams well before the meeting and make sure that your sound is working and your everything else that needs to go with it is working.
And that promises to be a lengthier discussion than what we're having tonight.
What I'm going to do is leave a copy of this invitation with you, Zakaria. And if you could maybe scan it, and whoever needs it, you can email it to them, or they can get it from our practice. It's they can phone there and get it, or whatever information. And we've also got the QR code which I've left with you, and that's a QR code of the Vitiligo Society. So these are the ways that we can offer. But the other thing we can do is get patients involved. And what we want to have for them is an essay competition, and where the winner, we'll make a prize of 1,000 rand for them. And whoever sends the best essay, look, we would like to give you 10,000, but of course this is a non-profit organization. But we'll have 1,000 rand for the best essay regarding vitiligo, and we want it to sort of encompass the emotion attached to the vitiligo and the real life experiences of patients with vitiligo that they have. We want to have a photographic competition and use your creativity and photograph the vitiligo. And if you are comfortable with photographing the face and expressing the emotion, body, and so on, and also a drawing competition. So you can do a coloring competition and send those 3 things in. And for each category, there's 1,000 rand each.
And it's a platform for people with
It's a platform for creating awareness.
Express themselves.
We are going to put these things on the Vitiligo Society website for the world to see, for posterity. So please seize the occasion and come and do it.
So I wanted to allude to something else. So how important would you say is body positivity and self-acceptance in the management of this condition? Rather, what's your advice to someone who has just been diagnosed with vitiligo?
Yeah, I think it is vital. Not only, I think we should strive to make people aware that this is not something that is contagious. It's not something that is harmful. It's something that they can accept and to deal with. And I think we need to support them to be able to accept the condition. It's vital that we do that. And this is the whole idea of having these support groups, to let people accept themselves for one thing, and others who have the condition, without looking them up and down every time they walk past.
It's about acceptance. It's about awareness.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you for that, Dr. RABOOBEE. That was incredibly helpful. It's clear that managing vitiligo is not just about the skin, but it's about the whole person.
Yeah.
Let's see if we have any questions. I think we do have a WhatsApp here from a listener. She says, Salams, I have small white patches on my legs. Doesn't get big. She wants to know, does skin whitening cream cause vitiligo?
If you use something like monobenzyl ether of hydroquinone, and that's what we use for lightening the skin, then yes, that can cause permanent pigment loss. So for example, let's say a wife is applying it on the husband. You got to be careful to wear gloves while applying it, or else you could lose your pigment while applying it. And if you are applying it on somebody and you embrace, then of course it's possible to lose pigment in that area. So yeah, you can get pigment loss in that way.
Dr. RABOOBEE, any closing statements from you before we wrap up?
Well, thanks for all these questions, and thanks for allowing us to raise some awareness of this condition called vitiligo. And I hope that this is going to help the patients understand the condition. And please come and attend the meeting, because this will open your eyes to what vitiligo is and what can be achieved. And if you know somebody with vitiligo that's close to you that you can talk to, let them know the treatment is available. Let them go and see their dermatologist. And let the dermatologist give some ideas and some help regarding what can be done. So my closing remark is, if you have vitiligo and if you think you'd like to do something about it, please go and see your dermatologist.
And also to be aware that there's many support groups that's out there to
Absolutely.
learn how to live with it.
To start with, you can send your names to the Vitiligo Society, and we will then see whether there's a need or what the needs are. We'll ask those people that need the support what they need for support, and they need to tell us what they need. Right? Good.
Well, unfortunately, that does bring us to the end of the show. Thank you so much, Dr. RABOOBEE.
It's an absolute pleasure. I hope that the listeners benefited from our discussion today and will continue to benefit from the ideas that we've got planned for the near future.
And thank you for joining us, and thank you for helping us understand not just the condition, but the people behind it. Your kindness, your knowledge have truly made a difference to our listeners.
Exactly. Thank
And
you very much.
to our listeners, remember, awareness is the first step to acceptance. Vitiligo does not define who you are. Let's break the stigma, let's support each other, and let's spread understanding. Catch us again the same time next week on Medical Files, brought to you by Islamic Medical Association, as we talk about men's health. I'm Dr. Zakaria Ahmed Ismail. This was Medical Files. Until next time, be kind and stay healthy.
لمن أخلص الحب عمرا وسحقا لذاك الذي قد غادر. أحب الوفاء بشتى الصور، أحب الوفي الأمين الأغر.
We'd love to meet you. Pay us a visit. Radio Al Ansar.
It's official. Check us